Just before we carry on, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that while we're all in different places, we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish First People. I'm not aware of any late items, Ms. Snellgrove?
There is just one item.
Okay.
So for agenda item 5D, the presentation from Bill Corson, we're going to be adding Sarah Bonner from Aquaparian Environmental Consulting to present with him, and I can see that she is on Zoom as well at the moment. And that's it for me. Okay,
thank you. And we had also discussed moving 5B, the Reimagine Nanaimo update on indicators, to the end of that section, just in case there's more discussion on that. So if that, I will make that proposal and then to adopt the agenda as amended. Is there a mover? I can only see, okay, and Jerome, dear, you seconder? Thank you. The only two I can see. So call the question. All those in favor, if you don't turn on your screen, or I will assume that you are in favor. All those in favor? Any opposed? Agenda carries. We have the adoption of the minutes from the January 27th Environment Committee meeting. Is there a mover to adopt those?
Moved.
Second by Jerome. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. I would really appreciate it if people could turn on their video. If you can't, I understand, but it does make running the meeting a little more difficult. Item 5A, checkout bag regulation bylaw update. Presentation from Kirsten Gellan, Zero Waste Coordinator for the City of Nanaimo. I see Taj is here as well. And Bill, you have your audio on, so I'll turn it over to you folks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be in front of the committee. I'll just introduce Taj Daliran, our Manager of Sanitation, and he's just going to touch on the current checkout bag regulation bylaw that's coming into effect shortly, that Council recently adopted and we recently received ministerial approval for. And it's just really to provide the committee with an update. If you have any questions as well, he'd be happy to answer them. Thank you. Tosh.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I briefly just touch about what the bylaw is about briefly. It's about not business is not circulating any single-use item checkout bag, and to minimize the sales and circulation of any single item bags in overall. We are hopefully would put this in place as our businesses are well aware of what's coming to them. The bylaw requires that only items that will be sold would be the item that contains at least 40% that puts recycled paper materials in them. And we are trying to eliminate the sales of single-use checkout plastic bags. I would like just to go back slightly on a brief timeline of the project. As taken place in December 2017, it started from there. Council moves that the City of Nanaimo wishes to ban the use of plastic bags. It was continued in 2018. Council directed the staff to proceed with the public consultation. It was taking place between March and June 2019. By July 2019, consultation finalized and a draft of the regulation was ready. In July 2019, province and federal government announced plans to regulate single-use plastic with bans as early as 2021. And then on July 2019, also, BC Court of Appeal ruled the single-use bylaws required provincial approval. Then, forward to January 2020, the Supreme Court of Canada further clarified the single-use bylaws required provincial approval. And then by March 2020, we had the Government of and Priority Committee to was presented by the consultation result about the bylaw. By March 2020, the province declared a public health emergency, which based on that, we just put the project on hold. And then in October 2020, we came back to the council again to proceed with the recommendation. And then after 3 readings, it was approved. And our project timeline was to start with the submission to the province for the final approval. It was approved in earlier this year, and since then we have started the communication with our businesses and our public. And the major focus was communication with our businesses to make sure they are all prepared. We identified the businesses that may be impacted, and we have sent 1,700 letters out to our businesses, informing them about the bylaw and some details and some information that could be useful for them. But also, we have created a website that they can reach out to that website or directly reach out to us if they need any further assistance. And hopefully, we are implementing the bylaw by July this year.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions from committee members? I see none. So thank you very much for your efforts on this and the challenging year and bringing it forward. So much appreciated.
Chair?
Yes.
It comes into effect July 1st. Great, and then it's how long of sort of a probationary period?
We had that conversation internally that we are trying to support our businesses, and I have had a couple of stores reach out to me that what if we don't finish what we have in place. We told them as long as you have started ordering the new materials that is acceptable by bylaw and not ordering any more plastics, we work with you to make sure that you go through your inventory, considering that our goal is to support our businesses and we are in the pandemic situation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, much appreciated. So we're going to move on to the presentation regarding the water supply strategic plan. Mr. Bill Sims, over to you to introduce it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity once again. Thanks, Taj. The committee may be aware that the water supply strategic plan was done in 2005, 6, and 7 and adopted. And then since then, as part of our Reimagine, we've rolled this into the entire Reimagine process to update the water supply strategy. So a lot of the work that was done at the time as a result of the original strategic plan has been implemented. Like we have now a new water treatment plant. Where are we going from here? So that's the intention of this. I'll turn it over to Mike Squire, our manager of water resources, and his intent, I think, is really to raise that level of awareness and education around this strategy. So I'll pass it over to Mike.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sims, and good afternoon, everyone. And being conscientious of time, I'll try to get through this in 10 minutes and touch over everything very lightly here on a very high level. So as part of Reimagine and NIMO, we're updating the strategic plan, like Mr. Sims indicated, to ensure that we continue to have a safe and clean, portable drinking water supply system. Next slide, please. Thank you. And basically, we're updating the water supply strategy to ensure we continue to have a supply of clean, safe drinking water. That was the main focus on the original strategic plan developed over 10 years ago, was to basically primary focus on our water quality improvements. And an indicator of that is the construction and completion of the water treatment plant, which is successfully running for the last 5 years. Next slide, please. And what we're looking at primarily as our next vision, our next main goals, is to plan for continued population growth, help protect the environment, manage aging infrastructure, and build resilience into climate change and emergencies. Next slide. Thank you. I like to throw this out. You've probably seen this before, but basically this points out sort of a deviation between the growth and water demand. In the early 90s, you see a direct correlation between growth and water demand. They're very linear and they're projecting, but without full water meters and watering restrictions, you know, we would be in a different state. Now we're using the same amount of water 30 years ago with a population of 40,000 more. So again, we use demand management strategies such as watering restrictions, and we're in a community that is fully metered right from source to tap, which is very beneficial. And we can actually see and we can account for every water that has been consumed. Next slide. So you can see we're well below the national provincial average for residential demand, and we've exceeded our 2035 target and our water conservation strategy. So with Reimagine Nanaimo, one of our key indicators there is developing what is our next target? How low can we actually go from residential use? And what we want to do is we want to target that outdoor use, and there's a huge education component. What we're seeing there, people are they're understanding water use, they're being more conscientious of water, but where will we bottom out? Are we at a European standard? I think we can get there eventually, but that's going to take a lot of time, a lot of education. Next slide, please. Environmental needs. We need to be very conscientious. Most of the public don't understand for over almost 90 years now the impoundment behind the dam in itself, our water supply dams. Over 70% of water storage behind our dams is for fisheries flow releases, and during those critical times of when the fish are rearing up the Nanaimo and South Nanaimo River, they need that additional water for that wetter perimeter. Domestic water use makes up the remainder of that. So we need to be conscious going forward that environmental flow releases are there for the future. Next slide, please. And community safety. Obviously, we have our in-town reservoirs. 70% of that stored water is for fire emergencies, for fire suppression and firefighting, for fighting a 3-hour event or even greater in some areas. So that's a lot of infrastructure to look after, and we need to ensure that is there for in the future. Next, please. And obviously looking forward, with Reimagine, there'll be several scenarios presented. We need to be with water supply and planning infrastructure. It's not we will build the water supply and people will come. It's the other way around. The OCP or the regional growth strategy sets that vision. In this case, it's Reimagine, looking at different growth scenarios and ensuring that our water supply can actually be conveyed to that future predicted scenario. Next, please. And looking at our major infrastructure, such as our water treatment plant, that projecting out those growth scenarios and that future forecasted water demand, that we ensure that we have the correct capacity. You see on the graph here, 40 years from now, we will not exceed our treatment plant capacity. So we don't need to look at that in the next few years other than the simple operation of the membrane replacements. Next, please. One of the things too is obviously climate change. You've heard a lot about that. Longer, drier summers, more higher intensity winters. What we see is in the green, I call it the bulge, is those seasonal demands. It's that outdoor water use, people watering gardens, people watering their lawns. Basically our demand doubles in itself between April and October. But what does that look like going into the future? We're looking at going into the shouldering seasons of early April, such as last year, and well into October. So that's looking at definitely more demand. So that deserves a lot of education component on and a fixation on outdoor water use. Next, please. So we also looked at watershed yield. As a result, looking back over 10 years ago, the original study predicted that in, probably 2022, we would need a new dam based on the consumption as a result of lower demands, lower water use, and a decline in that consumption. Our current the previous estimate was around year 20 to 35. If you go to the next slide, please. This is our current model, what we're looking at right now. 40 years from now, year 2061, the blue line represents our reservoir. The green line, the dotted green line, represents a historical reservoir level. We like to have at the end of the use, near the end of August, September, about 30% storage, not knowing what's going to happen for the next year. We don't typically want to dip into that reserves. But what this model is showing 40 years from now, in a drought year, which happens one every 50 years on average, that we would be slowly dipping into that reserve. And it's basically unpredictable what will happen in the next year if you have back-to-back droughts. If you show the next slide, please. Now, by going to stage watering restrictions, going into stage 3, that would account for actually less demand. And we know that over the last 5 years, we can put that into the model. And we, if we're in a 1 in 50 year drought, we would automatically go to stage 3 watering restrictions, which is voluntary. We would see at least a 15% decrease in demand, and we would still be able to supply environmental flow releases for the river, and we wouldn't dip into the 30% reserve storage. Next, please. So right now, our preliminary findings right now, if we did raise the dam an additional 6, maybe 12 meters in height, that it would not fill to the maximum storage during certain drought year events. And what we found is there is sufficient storage in the Jump Creek Reservoir and enough to sustain drought conditions with climate change while providing environmental flow releases to the Nanaimo River for the next 20 years, providing demand management practices that are in place. So knowing this, we can actually focus on in-town resilience, building resilience within our system. Next, please. And kind of a good segue into this is a project that we've looked at. Unfortunately, it caught us by a little bit of a surprise. Last year, we had that water main break, pretty substantial break on Bowen Road. It's one of our primary feeds to the Midtown region and the North End. We only have one primary main that crosses underneath Parkway, and then it goes under butter tubs, and then it feeds into the Bowen system. This system we looked at fairly heavily. We put a budget together last year fairly early. We had weeks to put in a budget trying to accelerate this project. And if you show the next slide, please. With that, we're looking at building the concept. If we're going to be building a new water main, basically extending a third of the city right from College Heights all the way to the Labio through Beban Park, why don't we put, over top a development of a future proposed pedestrian walkway trail off the main corridor of roads. This would connect the ENN to the Parkway connector, and then also connect in the VIU as well. And we hope that this project is exemplifying the strategy and heart of where Reimagine Nanaimo is coming from. And it would provide a strong linear linkage for multimodal pedestrian bike lanes and a trailway, but also providing that core infrastructure of water main replacements, and gives us not only a primary new main for directly connecting from the College Park Reservoir down to Labio, with providing also, we would have the luxury of gravity, and which would avoid the future pumping station at Labio as well by doing this infrastructure project. Once that primary main is in place, then we would look at replacing the Bowen Road, and we have options to do that, whether we excavate out the existing water main on Bowen Road, or do we twin it with the existing primary main that's going along the Parkway on the north and east side? Next, please. So one of those things, the challenges that we're looking at and trying to link in with Reimagine NIMO and trying to be sustainable while we're building a core infrastructure project is the crossing of Millstone River. Do we go under or do we go over? These are some of the things that we really need to look at from a feasibility analysis. What are the costs, but what are also the costs of impacting that environment, those indirect costs? And the next slide, please. And the same thing bodes well for the crossing of the Parkway. Do we go under or do we go over? This is into a very rock cut with a fill, very difficult to cross underneath. The actual ground conditions are very large, riprap mass fill haul, and also would require a lot of night work, potentially open cut work, trying to directional drill versus going overhead. And if we're going to be building something like this for the next 80 to 100 years, what does that look like? Do we need a pedestrian crossing? Primarily first, this is a utility project, but the other benefit of that is connecting, one community separated by a major parkway, highway, going into the VIU and into Westwood. So there is a huge potential there that we're looking at, but obviously it needs to be a feasibility analysis. Next, please. And that's it. Essentially, in a nutshell, where we are with the project. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thanks, Mike. If I could get just the screen share to end there. And I do see, Ben, you got your hand up there.
Thanks for the presentation. Questions like on the if you had to do overhead crossing over the highway, would you could basically put a pipe overhead and then put a pathway on top of it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
that's cool.
It's essentially a pipe bridge first and foremost. And if we're going to be doing that, very much like the Millstone crossing, we would make it wide enough and the loadings for pedestrian traffic. And the advantages of that, obviously, that creates a huge corridor for connectivity from pedestrian multinodal. But it also, we're looking at different options. Obviously, the feasibility analysis, it needs to be something that would weigh out that we need to look
definitely
at
want
the impact
the
environment.
pipe, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry, Jerome.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. That's quite interesting. I'm curious, the seasonal bulge that you have on your slides, that includes, is that with or without restrictions?
Mr. Chair, that is without restrictions currently right now. And what restrictions will do is that's demand management, what we're looking at. And partly education, making people understand if we can reduce that bulge, that seasonal bulge, that is less demand in our system and less infrastructure that we have to build sooner rather than later.
So what's the range, like order of magnitude decrease that you require or that you would like to see? Like if you have to come up with a target, you're talking 10%, 20%?
Well, that's something that we're going to be looking at in the next months. We've, through our water supply strategy update, we're looking at that trend. And like I mentioned before, is how low can we actually feasibly go? Every year is surprising. Last year was a new record for low demand. Yet we've had exponential growth. So we'll be reporting back. That'll be one of the recommendations in the water supply strategy to produce another target out into the future.
Okay.
Wally.
Thank you. Firstly, I can't turn my camera on because it says that the host has blocked the camera. So I'm not able to do that.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There, we can see you now.
Oh, you can. No, you can. Yeah, I'm very glad to see that you've accelerated the construction of the main to back up the hospital. I worked very closely with Bill Sims, and Bill very kindly produced a excellent case study for the Asset Management BC newsletter. Because we really realized when you look at risk and consequences, it became a very critical piece of infrastructure. Saying that, I also looked at your slide, realizing its conceptual design. If you choose to cross the Parkway, you had a single pier in there holding up the bridge for a walkway. I would strongly recommend that that is a piece of critical infrastructure. And if the truck ever hit it, took that out, we're in big trouble again. So I would strongly suggest that you look at the design of that you put a false pier in around it in order to mitigate any potential traffic accidents, not taking out that. Because the cost, one, the disruption would be huge. Secondly, the cost to do that with the loss of water and the loss of service would be horrendous. So you're talking, you said 80 to 100 years. I'd love to tell you there wouldn't be an accident there in 180 to 100 years, but the probability is there will be. So please look at that structure different than just a pedestrian bridge with a pipe underneath it.
Thanks, Wally. Any additional questions or comments from the committee? All right, I see none. So thank you so much for the update. The next presentation is the Nautil Waterfront Walkway Departure Bay update. Mr. Corson, welcome, and I understand you're joined by Sarah Bonner, so welcome.
Thanks, Chair. My camera's blocked too, but that's okay. So yeah, thanks for having me this evening, folks. Oh, there we go. There we go. Now I'm here. Hi, everyone. So thanks for having me this evening. I'm going to spend a few minutes just updating you on our Waterfront Walkway project. And I think it's a project that has some really interesting environmental benefits to it, whether it's restoration of the foreshore or whether it's through to the active transportation components of it as well. And as the chair mentioned, Sarah Bonner, who's one of our environmental consultants on the project, she's joining me this evening to answer any of your specific environmental questions you might have, because that's certainly not one of my areas of experience. So next slide, please. So just in terms of the project itself, this was has been around for many decades, but about 3 councils ago it was put into the strategic plan as something that council at that time wished to progress a bit. And in 2017, we did an overall plan for the entire walkway because for those of you who enjoy it, you know it's about 4.5 kilometers in length right now, but it's piecemeal, and we've built bits of it here and there, but it wasn't a comprehensive plan on how to actually phase this and complete it. So in 2017, we completed the plan for a 13-kilometer walkway, and did lots of consultation with the public, and it was a very well-received project from the public. Lots and lots of support, and that was then endorsed by council in the end of December 2017. Next slide, please. So the plan itself has 6 different segments to it, we call it. There's a departure bay segment, which we're going to talk about tonight. There's Newcastle Channel, which has little bits of it built, but not all of it's completed. The downtown loop, which is largely built. We recently completed an interim version of it around Port Drive down through the Port Authority, and then the last remaining piece is the south end, which goes all the way down to the estuary. And that's within the plan, it talks about cross sections, it talks about alignment in different areas, and talks about some of the amenities to consider when you build this. Next slide, please. So in terms of departure bay, that was the area from the public that had the most support as an area we should focus our initial efforts on. And like I say, the plan does roll out a plan for the entire walkway, but departure bay being first. And we looked at a couple options here. One was to build it on beach using a green shores approach, and the other was an elevated walkway section. And we did look at the elevated walkway section. If we go to the next slide, I can show you what that was. So in 2018, once we followed the plan, we looked at building the first section of the walkway elevated because we thought that would have less environmental impact in this specific area. But we found to actually build it was incredibly complicated because you essentially had to build a temporary road on the beach to build the walkway. And then then remove the road afterwards. So that was what was called a value engineering assessment, which was a very useful exercise, which then helped push us towards this on-beach option and opened up a whole bunch of opportunities for us. Next slide, please. So in 2019, Council asked us to pursue looking at the on-beach option. And in order to do that, we had to really first take a feasibility study and say, well, can you or should you build on the beach? Is it, will it get washed away from erosion? What will this do to habitat on the beach? What are some of the other factors to consider? So we did a feasibility study. And in order to get that started, we did a request for proposals. We got a multidisciplinary team put together, which was led by McElhaney, and then has a whole series of other sub-consultants with specialties, including coastal engineering, archaeology, civil engineering, active transportation, etc. Next slide, please. So this is the area that we were looking at. So it's from the end of the BC Ferries Terminal in Departure Bay, along the shoreline to Battersea Road, to the Kinhut, which most people probably know where the existing walkway ends. Next slide, please. So the feasibility study was all about collecting data and understanding the area really well. And through that, the consultant team came up with 3 concepts on how you could actually build this. And then from those concepts, we essentially amalgamated those into a preferred option. And through that work, we learned about the various approvals we'll have to get. We learned about how we deal with sea level rise and how we deal with geotechnical issues in the area and storm events. Chair, I see that one of the members of your committee has a question. Should I continue or?
I think it's just the leftover, actually.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thanks. Next slide, please. So one of the big issues, of course, was understanding the impact of waves and storms, and whether or not this would actually wash away the walkway, which would then be not much of a project. So the coastal engineers did this modeling, and were able to look at all the weather events and wave action in the harbor. And again, this is a picture showing the worst case scenario where you have winds blowing down Howe Sound that come across the strait right into the bay. And the impact that has on the shore. So they've the consultants, having done that analysis, came up with the idea of building these little headlands, which help break up the wave action, and then those become part of the design to minimize the wave action on the infrastructure. Next slide, please. And then sea level rise is, of course, a big one because you're building on the foreshore. So how high should you build this? And we decided to use a 50-year time horizon, not 100. So that's an extra 60 centimeters. And the reason we did that is because the sewer main managed by the RDN has the same alignment, and this project will be built on top of it. And it is likelihood in around 50 years that asset will need to be upgraded, and there'll be a chance then to raise the walkway if need be at that time. Next slide, please. And then, of course, being at the base of the Slair Bluffs, if you've walked along the beach, you know there's some sloughing that goes on. And so our consultants looked at where those areas are the most impactful, and then making sure the walkway itself is pulled out from the shore, so that if there is sloughing, that it does not land on like it does at the Vancouver Stanley Park seawall sometimes. And then, of course, also building on the foreshore also stops the erosion, the existing erosion of the toe of the slope. So that was good to incorporate into the designs. Next slide, please. And Sarah can talk more about this when we have questions at the end. But of course, one of the issues was, well, what's the impact of habitat on this beach if you build the walkway on it? And unfortunately, the existing beach has low habitat values. So there's really an interesting opportunity to turn this into a habitat restoration project. I think that's what's kind of one of the interesting findings from this project is there's an opportunity to restore Departure Bay Beach to where it used to be. And of course, with DFO, there's a no net loss principle, and that requires us to have a whole series of plantings that are part of this to encourage habitat productivity. Next slide, please. And then, obviously, this walkway is in the heart of Sonoma territory, and one of their main sites in Departure Bay. So we want to make sure that we're respectful and work within that context and framework. And so we had our archaeological team work with some of the elders from Snemo, and they did transects along the beach to identify areas of significance. And of course, the bay itself is very significant, but on the beach itself, there's not any direct archaeological sites itself, as you'd imagine, because it's been eroded and washed away. Next slide, please. And then permitting is a big one because the foreshore does not belong to the city, it belongs to the provincial crown. And we need to get approvals from the province through licenses and right-of-way agreements. DFO is involved, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, to actually build in this area. There's bonding required for the environmental work. We also need approvals from BC Ferries, and of course, with the RDN having a sewer line under there, it needs to be authorized by them as well. And the permitting is not easy. It's not a quick process, so it could take up to a year and a bit to get those approvals in place. Next slide, please. And then one of the other issues in this area along the waterfront is what are called riparian rights. So the folks who live in this Solera neighborhood, their property lines go right down to the foreshore, and you can't get permits from the province to build the infrastructure unless you have obtained the riparian rights from the property owners. So we need to work with the property owners to acquire those riparian rights prior to the project proceeding. Next slide, please. And now I've just got some photos for you, the concept renderings. These are our initial draft ones. We're working on a new communications package for the public, which will hopefully go out towards the end of May, which will include fly-through video, commentary, as well as refreshed images based on these, but a little more updated. So in this picture, you can see the pocket headlands just on the left there, which helps provide the protection. You can see the beach and the restoration work. The project itself includes a 3-meter wide pedestrian trail on the water side, a buffer in between, and then a 3-meter wide cycle lane. And then a sloped area in the back to capture rainwater, etc. Next slide, please. This is down by the BC Ferries end. This is Northfield Creek where it enters out. And in this area, it's rather than do a full beach restoration, we've kept it higher, similar to the Stanley Park seawall. And then it transitions into more of a beach setting there. Next slide, please. And this is the existing mud flat at BC Ferries. So this does get restored, but not necessarily for public access. So lots of habitat down there that can be rebuilt in the salt flats. Next slide, please. And yeah, here's just an example of the pocket headlands at the end of Battersea, where you can see access is important for people to get down to the beach. So we're actually creating essentially a 1.5 kilometer park along the waterfront here that has different access points for people to get down to the water and use this area not just for a stroll, but also for recreational activities. Next slide, please. And just an example of kind of the cross section of the cycle lanes versus the pedestrian facility on the left. Next slide, please. So through the feasibility study, it came back that yes, the project is feasible, and while challenging, it's the engineers and environmental consultants can probably make this work. So then our consultant team prepared the functional design. So that we've started off at the very high level, conceptual level, does this work? The functional design provides a little bit more meat to the bones, and that's where we're at right now. We still need to do the detailed design, which we wouldn't do unless unless council directed us to, or following feedback from the public. So the following slides I'm going to show you, we'll just go through it really quickly, is just the idea of the functional design, which shows the kind of the plan view of the walkway. Well, we're going to start in the north at the Kinhut and make our way down to BC Ferries. So next slide, please. So here we are up at the Kinhut at Lote Street, and in here we have a I'm going to get the term wrong. The Warnoff Street, the Dutch street, which has the pedestrian prioritization and just local vehicles only. And so this keeps people off the waterfront in this particular area, but uses the existing streets of Christie and Roundel Road. Next slide, please. And then we keep going down Roundel Road, we turn onto Battersea Road. Next slide, please. And then onto Battersea. So in the updated drawings we're going to be showing to people in a few weeks, these will be updated to reflect the new road sections. And then we can see the walkway starts in earnest at the end of Battersea, where we get into the separation of the pedestrian and bike path. Next slide, please. I think we see here most is the three headlands and some of the beach areas that have been established at this end of the walkway. Next slide, please. We've included viewpoints for people, as you can see one here. Next slide, please. More headlands to create little beach areas as well as provide that wave protection. Next slide, please. Again, yep, just more examples as we head south. Next slide, please. Another little view area. Next slide, please. Here we are getting into the end of the Slur neighborhood. So this is a connection up into the Slur neighborhood at White Eagle, and a viewpoint just at the end before we cross Northfield Creek. Next slide, please. There's a Northfield Creek crossing and the connection into the existing trail at BC Ferries, which then takes you down to Stewart Avenue, which would connect you into the future cycle network that council's directing staff to work on, as well as hopefully the future expansion of the walkway in the Newcastle Channel section to complete that link between BC Ferries and Maffeo Sutton Park. Next slide, please. Oh, look at that. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so today the purpose was to present the project to you at kind of a high level in advance of this going out to the public, like I say, at the end of May. Certainly like to get any feedback you have from your committee's perspective. And as I mentioned, Sarah Bonner's here if you have specific questions about the environmental benefits or impacts of this project. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Bill. Any questions from the committee for Bill or Sarah? Jerome.
A couple questions. The first one is, what happens if one or two people refuse to give up their riparian rights?
Yeah, so we'll need to work with the owners on that and work with them to get to an agreement so that the project won't proceed without those. So it is contingent upon those owners and the city coming to an arrangement.
And so where does that happen in the process? Because you could go to detailed plans, you can go to costing, and then that could all fall apart at the last second, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is our current timeline, and it's subject to, of course, council direction. But right now, we're going out to the public in end of May and June to get some feedback, and then we're going to take that feedback to council, hopefully in the summer, and then decide how council wishes to proceed. The project has to be funded through a referendum. We don't have money set aside for this project, so they would require a referendum on the project, and that could be done this fall or coincide with the election in 2022. And then at that point, if the public like to do the project, then one of the first things we need to do is to be going out and negotiating those riparian rights. And then at the same time, probably getting started on the detailed design. But I wouldn't get too far into it until that aspect has been taken care of.
So one thing that I've never heard of as an option, I'm skeptical of the design in the sense that I think there are some aspects of it that are either glanced over a little simply, like the instability on the Cellar Bluffs, for example, is a big deal. And so you can pretty much build anything if you have enough money to do it, but that becomes almost exponential in terms of solving the problems. And so I'm wondering why there's never been a third option of just building a bridge across Northfield Creek and routing along White Eagle Terrace Road. I know it's not a waterfront walkway, but it would basically be the cheapest, quickest connection or solution to connectivity, right? To making something continuous in terms of a path. And it seems like that's never been an option. And I know that's because it's not right on the water, and it's not an environmental restoration project in the same vein, but it does tick the box of at least connecting the paths across the waterfront, which is not even something we can claim at this stage. And we can't even claim it even if you proceeded with this project on the waterfront, on the beach.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, through our consultation process, we had about 2,000 people involved, and I think most people want to see the project on the waterfront.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you. I think if the goal of the project was to create connectivity, that would be an option for sure. I think the challenge might be at the Battersea end. I'm not too sure how you'd connect in at that
Yeah,
end.
you'd have to cross Departure Bay Road somewhere and come back around or something. I don't know.
And then down the hill, yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
I think one of the goals from an accessibility perspective is try to keep it. I think the biggest issue people have is getting up Departure Bay Hill, and probably easier now with e-bikes, I guess. But the idea was you could travel at the same with no elevation gain from Departure Bay to downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah. But those are good points. Thanks, Jerome.
Additional questions, Jerome?
What's the cost estimate?
8 to
I mean, there's got to be a
19 million.
ballpark, right?
18 to 19 million, I believe it was on the slide there.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're still.
sorry, I missed it. Okay.
And we're still finalizing that one too, Chair. So we'll have the final. The engineers are doing a final cost on us before we go out, and in a few weeks.
And in that cost, is there a maintenance cost rolled into that? Because there are like numerous examples of beach nourishment efforts that have actually turned into multi-million-dollar maintenance efforts, because you can do all the modeling you want, but the reality is that you're basically creating a beach that does not exist in a configuration that does not exist today. And there's a reason for that. And sometimes that means that you've got a build that keeps going on because you got to feed that thing some sand because it just keeps moving away. Even though you've built some groins and breakwaters, there's a maintenance cost issue that it would be nice if that was part of the picture.
Yeah, there's a bond we have to do with DFO to ensure the planting takes, and that the plan. Sarah can maybe speak to this better than I can, but that's part of it, and you have to bond it for 5 years. And then I agree with you, like any asset, then you have to figure out what the annual maintenance costs are going forward. So, Sarah, I don't know if you can chime in on this.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so the DFO bond is for the whole intertidal treatment area, basically everything in addition outside of the actual walkway itself. So the intertidal slope, beaches, because the elevation of the walkway has to be higher than the existing topography. So sloped beaches, gravel sand beaches, rock headlands with the pocket beaches, all of those things are being designed to be stable, although dynamic. And Northwest Hydraulics will be checking that out to see what would be any impact from wind and wave on those structures to make sure it's not going to wash away. And you're right, there have been some projects like the one in Parksville, I can recall, that didn't hold. I don't know what was going on with the design of that, but it didn't work. We've done quite a number that did work. And Washington State has done many over the years that have been really successful. So if they're designed properly, they work. And they work to maintain the features, functions, and conditions of a dynamic shoreline with habitat value that would be higher in productivity and diversity than what we've got there, which within the footprint of the project is basically large cobble material with a very little biological diversity on it. So that's the gist of that, and it does need to be monitored for success criteria for 5 years to make sure it is actually contributing to fisheries productivity as we anticipate.
Wally.
Yeah, I think I know where Jerome is coming from, and I fully support what he's saying. Any capital project today should not be capitalized only. It needs to be looked on the life cycle costs. There is a requirement for maintenance on that. There's going to be a staffing requirement. There's going to be cleaning. There's liability issues if it's not maintained. That trail is going to be checked regularly, as you do with parks and everything else. Those operational costs and potentially staffing need to be considered. We've got too many cases where projects have been capitalized and then the operations and maintenance budgets haven't been adjusted to allow for that. So please make sure that you look at the life cycle costs of the whole project.
Great idea. Thanks, Wally.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? Okay, I don't see any. There was the recommendation, I believe, for the committee included at the end there to endorse the project, but that also isn't required. But just if someone wants to move that. Okay, I see nobody moving to endorse it, so we can move on to.
Eric, can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Jerome.
I mean, we can endorse it. I'm not sure what that offers. I'm not against the idea. I just don't know if that's really, it's at a stage where we should even be pronouncing ourselves on it. I don't know. If it's just a matter of rubber stamping it so we can go forward, then I guess that's required. But otherwise, I don't know. Am I the only one that feels that it's kind of an open-ended request? I'm not really sure the purpose of it is, other than just saying, yeah, we like it.
I would tend to agree with you because I don't think it actually matters if the committee endorses that it's on a path to at some point being considered by council. So,
I mean, I'm not looking to scuttle the thing at all. At the same time, I don't know what we're doing, what we're offering to it beyond it. So if it's just really a symbolic gesture, then I'm happy to say, yeah, it's a good idea, but it still needs a lot of details filled in.
I think it's a gesture at this point.
Okay, then sure, I'll support the gesture of saying it's a good idea.
All right.
Concept, anyways.
Is there a seconder? Second by Wally. Any discussion on that? Call the question. Oh, Ben, go ahead.
Sorry,
and then
no,
Lisa.
go ahead. Yeah, I was gonna say, my experiences in Vancouver, this would be an absolute incredible asset, I think, for the community, and it does increase sort of the ecological health as well. I think that it's a win-win-win. There's still quite a lot of elements that need to be ironed out in it, but it's a pretty cool concept.
Lisa.
Yeah, I noticed the motion that was proposed or suggested to us had a bit of a different spin in that it didn't say endorse the project as a whole necessarily. Like, I mean, I assume it does, but the environmental benefits of the project looked like that was what was being suggested to us. So I just wanted to clarify that. There was a slide that had, project as a flagship environmental restoration project. So just to clarify, it is an amazing project for a lot of different reasons, but it looked like there was maybe a look for us to endorse it on that environmental restoration aspect specifically. Is that correct?
That is the intention of the motion here.
Right. Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? Yeah, I'm actually not going to be voting in support of this. Not that I don't think it's a good project. I just don't know enough details about the whole project to comment one way or the other. I do think it's a good idea overall, and I do think it will be delivered upon, but just not at a stage where I'm comfortable doing that. So we'll call the question. All those in favor? Ben, Harvey, Jerome, any opposed? Myself, opposed. If you don't raise your hand, you voted in favor.
And Chair, could you please ask Darren just to clarify how he voted? I believe he's muted right now and his camera's off.
Darren, if you're able to indicate how you voted. Darren, if you're able to, please unmute and let us know you're there and how you voted. Okay, we'll just move on then. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Sarah, for being here. Reimagine and IMO updates on indicators. Mr. Rob Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Bring this first slide up. I'm going to be doing a presentation with Karen Constal, and many of you have seen the slides already. And we've also sent you a set of the documents that we reviewed during the workshop in March during our last committee. Next slide, please. So we're going to be having a little bit of a review of the workshop highlights and go over the draft city corporate indicators that were voted on and how that came about. And I'm going to spend a little extra time on the environmental ones. And as we walk through the social and economic ones, I'm hoping Karen can speak to those and add any comments as we kind of walk through those slides. And then a couple of slides at the end just to kind of map out some of the next steps and how we see using this information and how it'll integrate into phase 2 of the Reimagine Nanaimo process. And then obviously have some discussion and hear your comments and see how the committee feels about where we are at this point. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you. So highlights, as we all know, back in March, we had about 40 participants actually. So members of council, the Health and Housing Task Force, I believe, and the Economic Development Task Force, as well as members of the Environment Committee participated. So that was very well attended. So thank you. 6 facilitated Zoom rooms, as you may recall, each with a facilitator, and looked at the different main primary goals and had some great discussion with a lot of members and focused sessions. And then there was a bit of a breakout where each member could go to different rooms and add comment at the end of the workshop, which I thought was a good idea. 75 potential indicators were reviewed on a number of focus area sheets, and there was an example in the next slide I'll show. And 21 indicators on those sheets were voted, and those are the ones that are in the slides that we're going to be highlighting as we walk through the draft goals. Next slide. So as I say, there's a draft or an example of one of the sheets, and as I say, members have had a chance to look at this ahead of time, so just so we can just remind ourselves of some of the comments. And it was certainly each of the focus areas on the environment. For the environment ecological ceiling, each of those focus areas had one of these sheets to look at with a series of draft indicators that generated much of the discussion, and where there was an opportunity, people could vote on what they felt was a strong candidate for that particular focus area. Next slide. Now, let's see if you can spot yourself in there. Hopefully doing nothing embarrassing. But anyway, it looks like a good group. Next slide. So let's just carry on. This is just kind of a repeat of an earlier slide. Next slide. Yeah, next slide, yeah. So the draft goals are kind of the core of the donut economics framework, and much of it is based around some of the fundamental social and economic backgrounders, as well as the ecological ceiling that was based on obviously the donut framework, partly, but also from a lot of input that we received prior to this through staff, through the workshop, on what our current indicators are through the regional growth strategy and through our indicators that we use currently in the city. Next slide. So 5 draft goals: a healthy community, a connected community, an enabled community, an empowered community, and an ecological community, with that being the ceiling and the 4 previous ones being the heart of the framework. Next slide. And at the end of the day, 25 draft indicators that are to be used throughout all the 5 goals. And this is a really important point too. It was trying to hit that balance between having a good representation of indicators that we could use that cover these broad goals and all the facets that we feel are important, but at the same time not being so unwieldy and having too many indicators to try and effectively manage within our capacity. So hopefully we've kind of hit that balance. And I should note, it's an evolving work in progress, as it says on the slide. As we go through this process, as we hear your comments, indicators will change and maybe bumped up or bumped down depending on the feedback that we get going forward. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So this is, okay, we're just kind of slowly kind of walking into the framework basically, but it's just kind of illustrating again the 4 core social and economic goals in the center. And then that form the base of the social foundation, and then each of the Reimagine Nanaimo focus areas, adapt and stay green, live, connect, recreate, get outside, all these kind of are core components of our Reimagine Nanaimo process. And then finally at the last slide, next slide I should say, the components for the ecological ceiling. And those are the focus area sheets. If you one more slide. Yeah, those are the focus areas that we had sheets for, that had specific indicators that were really kind of the heart of that workshop that we walked through earlier. Next slide. So this is one of the first of the indicators with the goal. I don't know, Karen, are you there, available?
I am, Rob. I don't know.
How about walking through some of the social and economic indicators until we get to the ecological?
Sure. Thank you, committee, for having us here. I'm really glad that we have this opportunity today. We did have an opportunity to present to the Governance and Priorities Committee on Monday, but you know, it's a very full agenda always, and we perhaps didn't have as much time as we would have liked to have to get feedback. So this is another awesome opportunity for conversation. With these healthy community indicators, we're looking at several that we have already been collecting data on around chronic and episodic homelessness through the point in time count, housing affordability as measured by the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment, which is available through the CMHC, the vacancy rate, which is provided annually also through the CMHC, and then mix of housing type in neighborhoods, which is something coming out of the affordable housing strategy in terms of housing diversity, but is something that we would need to establish targets for through Reimagine Nanaimo. Next slide, please. Now, Rob, some of these I know that you're as familiar with as me, but this is with the connected indicators. It's a mix here of access to resources, such as access to daily needs, and some of the transportation related indicators that I know are of keen interest to this committee, such as transformation by mode split, and then distance driven per capita, which we have baseline data from through the Nanaimo Transportation Master Plan. As well, we have public waterfront access, and then land use mix in nodes and corridors, which is a little different from housing mix, because in that case, we're looking at the mix of different types of uses, not just residential uses, but commercial, industrial. And that's actually building on work that's being done through the Regional District of Nanaimo and has been done for quite a few years, but we would probably want to refine that somewhat in our own analysis. Next slide, please. The empowered goal, and we are open to all feedback on the goals and the goal statements as well through this committee, is a mix as well of safety type things like the traffic injury rate, which should be looking at the safety of specific intersections, as well as some newer indicators that are coming forward through our Parks and Recreation and Culture Department that are actually still being developed in terms of what would these entail. It wouldn't be things such as population diversity, but be more along the lines of the inclusion diversity of our programs and our facilities. Likewise, investment, art and culture and heritage. That's something that our accessibility and inclusion committee was looking at 2 weeks ago, and I think is still a topic to be discussed. But everyone agrees these are very important domains to look at. It's just how we measure them in a consistent and reliable way is something that's still being worked out and is being done differently in various communities. So we're looking at best practices in other places. Next slide, please. And then the fourth sort of social economic one is in the enabled one. And I know that council gave feedback. So this is old language, and some of the indicators have already been changed from this slide. Working age population is, I believe, one that we're going to stick with in terms of trying to achieve a balanced population in the working age category. Residential building permits, I think, is one, or non-residential building permits, I believe, is one that they're re-looking at as whether that's actually one that we want to keep in the top tier. And business growth was replaced by diverse, inclusivity? It was inclusive and diverse employment opportunities, I think, what it was. I should have pulled up the slides from Monday, but that was more looking along the size of businesses, both the number of businesses and businesses with employees. But that, again, is something that our Economic Development Officer, Amit Manhas, is looking at other ways that communities are perhaps measuring specific types of business growth. And it's all a matter of data availability, reliability, and cost. And I believe the next slide is yours, Rob, because that's
Yep.
turning more
Next
over
slide.
into the environmental end of things.
Sounds good. And then just to kind of finish off, as I say, the top indicators that we heard through our facilitated discussions and those that voted, and also what was heard over the recorded conversations that the facilitator pulled together at the end of the workshop, kind of indicated that these were the indicators that the group felt most strongly, that we heard anyway. So GHG emissions community-wide, and I would say almost also the adaptation as well as the mitigation side, I would argue, and clearly we have a target now that's already been adopted by council. Protected environmentally sensitive area lands, so whether that's lands that are under city control within a park system, or lands that may be on a park acquisition list for future purchase. But in addition to that, also looking at the restoration needs of these sites, because through some earlier analysis through the province, through the sensitive ecosystem inventory, there's very unique ecosystem types to East Vancouver Island that have been identified to the city that eventually became part of our environmentally sensitive area development permit area, but also was used for park acquisitions over the last 10, 20 years. So these sites are kind of very core and unique ecosystem types to the city. And the idea to see that as an indicator, I think makes sense, but there could be conversations around how connected they are, and what more can we do on the restoration side, of course. Surface water quality. A lot of work has been done on the regional level through the Drinking Water Watershed Protection Program to work with a number of volunteers on using provincial water quality guidelines to monitor water quality on a number of streams throughout the region, including urban streams in the city. And some streams have more data than others, but it depends on how long groups have been involved with the monitoring. But I know that those groups are increasing, so we would expect more creeks will be included in the program, as well as lakes and wetlands in the future. Collected waste and household from the household, actually, I should say, and that's an indicator that we currently collect. So that's basically kilograms collected per household per year through curbside collection. And then the last one, I think Mike had spoken to early in his presentation, that while they're working on an indicator through their current strategy, it's looking at total residential daily use, so liters per capita per day. This was seen as an important indicator as well. Next slide. So I can speak to this, and maybe Karen will have a few thoughts, but I could say going forward, the development scenarios for the next phase, the indicators that we choose from the previous slides will play an important role in how we design those scenarios, and the input we get from council and from the public, I think, will help kind of feed into what targets that we eventually, or how aggressive, or how far out the targets that we decide on at the end of the day, using the indicators that have been selected. So some may feel there needs to be a target up front, but I think the intention, though, is to try and use these indicators as a starting point, and with that input through the scenarios of the next phase, have a better sense of what the specific target needs to be. Karen, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think I answered a question on Monday maybe a little poorly, in that I think I implied that there were no targets that existed, and for quite a few of these indicators we do have existing targets because they're pulled from other council endorsed or approved plans, or they're pulled from other strategies that we've been part of. And sometimes with things like the vacancy rate, they're just sort of general known best practice. But there are certainly some of these targets a range that could be considered and would be developed or associated with different scenarios.
Next slide. Next slide, sorry about that. Yeah, next steps is our last little focus, and so next slide. Yeah, I don't know, Karen, did you want to speak to this?
Well, just to let you know that we are in phase 2, where we're developing scenarios. Our next step in terms of milestones is having a workshop with council on May 31st to talk about the scenarios and get feedback on those before we go to public engagement in June. We don't have a specific date for launching public engagement, but we are intending for it to start in June and last until September is the current timeline. And then phase 3 would be the fall and winter, developing the plans and having a little bit more public engagement around that, and then finishing up in the first quarter of 2022.
Next slide. Thank you, Karen. That concludes the presentation. So looking forward to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, and thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Karen. Appreciate it. Committee members, any questions, comments, thoughts for Karen and Rob? If I could just get the screen to stop. There we go. Got it. Jerome and Wally.
Go ahead, Wally.
Wally.
Oh, I think you're muted, Wally.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I think we need to be very careful with the criteria that we look at, why we're collecting that data, how we're collecting the data, and I'll come back to an example in a minute. And what does it tell us, and what do we want to do with the result? Because we can get into a lot of things that are information only, and they're great, and they take time to collect and everything, but we need to understand what we're going to do. One of the examples I just made a note of here is the collection waste per household. That's becoming, unfortunately, less relevant the way it's done, because if you look at the city bylaw, and that maybe needs to be changed, I believe the city do not collect any multiples of more than 4 units. There is, and Tara tell me there is, I think, over 800 single-family homes that are in strata developments that they collect the waste from. You look at the development around Nanaimo recently with the number of new 4 and 5 story rental buildings going up. None of that data is included because it's not collected by the city. And I believe the way the city is collecting that data right now is what's picked up by the city and city trucks. So it's actually the base for that data is shrinking under the current criteria. And those things need to be understood. I'm not suggesting it's not a relevant number, but it's a relevant number only if you understand what it is, and it's only a partial number.
Thanks, Will. It's good points and one well heard. Just for your awareness and the committee's awareness that through the regional district, the solid waste management plan does call for additional powers from the province, and one of those powers is the complete tracking of waste that is generated in the region. And that process is tracking well, and hopefully we'll be going for provincial approval on that very shortly, and then we would be in a much better position to license private haulers and track that waste as well.
I was aware of that. That's important.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to sort of echo that comment and also just say that, yes, it is largely single family, but it's an indicator as well. And so we know if recycling is going up or green waste is going up, then that's a good thing. If we know garbage is going up, then we need to make some changes. But that's really just tracking. It's an indicator. It may not be the whole picture, but it's certainly an indicator. Thank you.
Jerome.
Thanks. When we started this discussion on this donut model, one of the things that I found really that gave me some hope with the model is that it is meant to be integrative. And what I'm seeing happening after the workshop and the way this is being presented is that the donut has been sliced into pie pieces, and now each pie piece has its own set of indicators. And so in a way, what we've done is taken something that is meant to be kind of holistic and integrative, and there's a tendency or there's a risk that we have now created boxes for each one, and that the boxes no longer speak to each other. And what I mean by that is that many, I think, of the indicators, or at least many of the goals as they're stated, and some of the indicators that are now associated under the heading of each goal, those are shared across multiple goals. Sometimes they're like almost a 50-50 split in terms of an indicator that might apply to more than one goal or 2 goals. And in some cases, it's a smaller proportion in one way or the other. But the value of the approach of the donut, even if you don't want to call it the donut, whatever it is that it's meant to basically bring all these things together. And so we do not need, in doing this process, to define, like, yes, there's an ecological ceiling, unless there's a whole bunch of headings, on the outside of the ring, but we do not have to limit ourselves to defining indicators that only apply to the ecological bits. They can go across the boundaries of the donut. I think that's one of the key things about this whole concept of the donut. And what I'm seeing happening is that there's no discussion so far, and I don't see, and I would really like to see a discussion about these shared indicators and how one indicator then applies to more than one or two or three or four or whatever they are. I'll give you an example. We have greenhouse gas emissions as the top one. Right now, it's lumped into a community-wide greenhouse gas emission. We need to split this in at least three things: GHG from transportation, GHG from housing and buildings, and GHG from waste, for example. Once we define an indicator for the GHG for transportation, it triggers automatically at some point some kind of target. That target cannot be applied, cannot be implemented without thinking about how the city grows, whether it's going to be densifying or not. That can't be dealt properly without thinking about how transportation keeps up with or supports the growth or the densification of the city. And that transportation has a direct impact on the GHG targets that we set for ourselves. Okay, so what I would really like to see happen along the way, and I'm not seeing that in the way that it seems to be structured. It seems like we're going to the end of phase 2 into phase 3 about developing scenarios based on the indicators we have. And the indicators we have right now, to me, are so much in draft form that they need like a whole other looking at, and they need a whole other. I mean, there are things that are on those boards from the meeting, the Miro board. I mean, they're plucked right out of the existing plans. So if that's what we use, we have limited ourselves to what we've already been doing. There's no room for building on what happened at the meeting, repurposing, redefining, rejigging those. And then at some point, I would really love to see some kind of coming together of the indicators that go with each one of the goals, like the 5 or 6 or whatever they are, and then have a discussion about, hey, my goal and your goal are complementary. How do we craft a statement that then leads to targets that meet both of our goals, like meet both of our needs? And if we don't do that, I think we've missed the opportunity that the donut presents for us. And so my question is, like, when and where and who does this? When does it happen? How do we actually make it work? The meeting with the consultant and the board was a great way of getting everybody together, but to me, that's like step one, baby step one. And there needs to be like a deep analytical process going on in terms of what else we want to throw in there so that we can craft things that have some shelf life and that actually serve the purpose of building a picture as opposed to creating more boxes.
Great
May I
point.
respond? Or?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think, Jerome, what you're pointing out is so important, and is probably a failure on our part for the way we're presenting the information.
I don't, it's not a blame thing. I
don't mean failure in the sense, it's a deficiency, because it's a challenge to present the information to different committees with different audiences and different levels of expertise in a targeted way, but at the same time, maintain that sense of integration. And I promise you, we're only sharing like 10% of the background work that's going into developing every indicator. And, but I hear you, and I think the point you're making is really important. I'm thinking about, like, one of the examples with the connectivity is access to resources, trying to get people living closer to amenities. Well, of course, that has a huge impact on GHG emissions, because one of our main sources of GHG emissions is transportation. So, and trying to diversify housing needs also impacts transportation and GHG emissions by offering people more diverse choices so they don't have to drive as much. And so there's a deep level of connectivity that is very difficult to present visually. Yeah. And also it's somewhat a matter of how much time we have to do that kind of visual presentation. But our goal is to give to council in advance of the scenario workshop something more holistic as far as the city portrait goes, instead of PowerPoints and sort of chunk slide by slide things. And ideally we would share that with the committees as well. But I hear you, and I think I agree with everything you're saying. And Rob, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, I was going to say it's a good point, and it's going to be something I would suspect we're going to hear again, perhaps at council during the workshop that's coming up. But again, when the scenarios go public and we start looking for that public feedback, again, so there's opportunity for those kind of points to be raised, and still time to kind of make course corrections if necessary, as we go forward. So it's a starting point. I guess that's where we're at, really. And you're right. Baby steps. These are the initial indicators, and it's just a check-in, really, to say, are we missing something? Are there other indicators that should be switched out? Yes or no? If not, let's start with this and proceed. And like you said, we need to do a better job on the integration piece. Fair point.
Jerome, I have a question for you. It reflects my way of thinking, because I sort of have wrestled with the same thing. And what I actually do now is tend to ignore the different settings or segments. So if I ignore enabled, I ignore empowered, and I ignore those things.
Yes, me too.
And just focus on the indicators. The question I have for myself then is, okay, focusing just on the indicators, how does that relate back to the original donut? And so my question would be for you, if you remove those headings, would you still have the same criticism or the same question?
If I remove the headings, right.
So,
yeah, perhaps less. However, what I'm not seeing then are indicators that are sufficiently crafted that they have enough breadth. Okay? So that if I remove the heading, if I don't box them in under a heading, then if I look at those indicators, to me they're either that's another issue. There's a real mix of super specific indicators and very, very broad general ones. But some of what I'm looking for are indicators that have sufficient breadth that they can then span across multiple parts of the donut. Okay? So, for example, let me give you like an example, like just off the top of my head. Reduction in greenhouse gases tied to transportation, that would be what you're going to aim for. And you'd say, so we need to reduce to a point. That would be the target, but reduce the percentage or something. But sorry, I'm just trying to think on the fly here. So plan and develop the city or densify the city in order to improve or maximize or improve the efficiency of transportation or multimodal transportation in order to reduce greenhouse gases tied to transportation. Okay, so that, like, obviously you could clean that up a lot, but that idea like hits three boxes, three segments of the donut at least. So I agree. I mean, I know what you're doing. I know what you're saying in terms of like, the headings become they kind of handcuff you into something, but you kind of have to have them to start the discussion of how you're going to start crafting something. So I totally recognize that, and that's why I bring up the point, because to me that's like the first step, and that by far the hardest thing is the integration of it. Like that's the hardest thing to conceptually put together and then like implement in terms of putting the words that actually build something that you can really hang some meaningful indicators and targets onto. Like for sure that's the hardest part. Otherwise it really just is an inventory. It becomes an inventory in a shopping list. And if that's the stage at which it stops, it's kind of, it's not developed enough. So I guess that's the point I'm making. But I know what you're saying. And the donut does this because if you had no headings, it wouldn't make sense. But yes, let's not get handcuffed by the headings. Totally.
But I've sort of described it to people as like the vital signs. If you think about like the level of importance, trying to find the vital signs. And certainly we are here seeking committee feedback if you think that we're missing vital signs or we have things there that are not vital signs. Please let us know.
Okay, so for example, I was in the room that I was in was the one on one of the two green rooms on the greenhouse gas and the environment, right? Mm-hmm. So I have the page here, but something that Rob sent 2 weeks ago or a week ago was like a screenshot of the
sticky notes. Yeah,
the sticky notes. Thank you. The mirror board. So under the, if I look at that one, if I recall, you have the environment part. There's the greenhouse gas as one of the indicators, and then the other indicators that are in that space are all about resilience. Surely, like the scope of what we want to do in terms of the environmental aspects of the city cannot just be greenhouse gas and then resilience and how do we deal with climate change. There's far more things. More came out during the discussion. But the point is that the discussion was limited in time. There was lots of people. And even during that discussion, we were told, yeah, this is just the starting point. There's going to be more things that come in, and we're going to have to add them in and make sure that they work together. So I'll just ask the question again. Like, Karen, you're telling me that that's happening in the background, which is great. We just don't realize it, which is,
Well,
great.
I wouldn't say it's happening. I mean, it's also happening right now.
Great. Okay. Well, then I guess my question is still valid. Like, beyond right now, where does that sort of process of integration and discussion about how all these indicators can be married together to make sure that they kind of transcend the donut segments?
I would suggest the scenarios. I mean, when they get released, it's really going to be an integration in itself. There's only like a limited number of scenarios that are going to be presented, but they're going to have to integrate so many concepts that we're trying to get across. And it's not like they're set in stone either. So one scenario, you could pull certain things that you see as positive and you want to see in the community and add it to another scenario and vice versa. I think that's part of what that exercise will be about. Okay. I mean, I think the scenarios are primarily the land use, density, the choices, but behind that are all the issues around water quality, around greenhouse gases, around transportation. They all interconnect, and it's a matter of just trying to tease through that integration and understanding that, like I said, it's not set in stone. You can mix and match, and having the public and council kind of articulate that so that that can be kind of the new kind of version once it's reviewed.
So are these scenarios going to be built based on the 21 indicators or on a bunch of other ones that we haven't seen?
Well, I would say the indicators that we've just gone through, yes.
The 21.
But as I said in one of the slides, that can change as we get more input or council maybe makes a recommendation around that. There can be other indicators that we swap or add. That's possible too, sure.
So, but that would happen after the scenarios have been put together.
Oh, as part of it, through it, as during it, During
the process. Okay. So I'm trying to learn the process that you guys are going through at the same time as we're discussing it. Because to me, there have been enough plans like these or these types of things. Sure, they're not donuts, all of them, but there's enough environmental plans and climate change plans that exist that there's a lot of commonalities across cities in Canada in terms of what municipalities are aiming for. So if there are some indicators that did not make it onto those Miro boards or for whatever reason, discussion time, expertise of the group, whatever, the way the wind was blowing that night, who knows, right? There are things that were missed, or there are details that are not captured in those 21 indicators. And I would hope that we can just I can go pull the Saanich plan and I can pull 5 or 6 other indicators that are not on those boards, are not part of the 21 that I would consider to be equally important. And in some cases, being higher level in terms of how they can be, if you implement them and if you set targets for these, how significant they can become for the city.
Sure, but here's the other side of the coin is there's also the cost, the expertise to manage these indicators, and how much legacy of data do we already have from previous use of indicators, and how does our cities and indicators connect on a regional level? Because we do work with our neighbors as well, and we kind of try and share that responsibility. So I guess it's that element as well in all this, on how we help choose these, at least the starting point.
Sure. I mean, 100%. And there's some things that are not relevant in Nanaimo. Like the air quality portion of the donut is probably very low on the priority list for Nanaimo because it's not a place that has particularly, big challenges with air quality. So that's one that is going to, I think, in everybody's book, is going to rank lower than others.
So Jerome, I just want to make space here if anybody else has. So I think we're beyond questions, but in sort of discussion, which is all good. But just we got to make sure that we're making space for everyone. Bill.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to respond to about how the scenarios are being built. So we have 3 scenarios. So one is using our existing OCP and our existing Parks Rec Master Plan. So that's scenario 1. Because I think I always want to go back and remind people that our existing OCP works well in many ways, and there's areas where we want to tweak it. So the first one is, here's our existing plan, using the various indicators. Where is this going to lead us to, right? Then we have our acknowledgement that we have people moving into the city, that we have 40,000 people coming to Nanaimo. So how are we going to actually accommodate that growth? And that's what kind of scenario 2 and 3 try to acknowledge is, how do you actually deal with these people coming to the city? Where are they going to live? What form of development will that be? And then those two scenarios are then again evaluated using our indicators. So that's kind of where we're heading with it. The indicators are a way of measuring the scenarios, but the scenarios aren't built around the indicators. So it's the scenarios are based on our need for land, our need for employment land, our need for housing, and then they're evaluated. And we know at the end of the day, of the three, they'll be blended together to form the revised OCP and Parks Rec Master Plan and climate change strategy.
So Jerome, one thing I think
I'm thoroughly confused now. I'm thoroughly confused.
This is something I'm going to highlight. I'm really struggling with as well. And when I expressed it to Karen, I think she refined the answer a little bit of response today. So thank you very much, Karen. But one thing I'm really struggling with is I think Karen made a really good point, and we have lots of lots of goals and targets amongst the plans. And I think when we see the indicators and we see the donut that do not have those, whether they're existing, whether they're being developed actively or being updated, in absence of those and not having everything else contextualized with that, I think it's really hard to understand how the indicators fit in terms of those long-term, those goals. And then from there, how the scenarios will be derived, right? If you want to achieve these goals, this is scenario 1. If you're not willing to commit to those, it's status quo scenario, right? But I think, the list of indicators is could be good, could not be good. We don't really know. It's hard for me to know whether they are without seeing the list of the goals that they're trying to achieve and then the targets. So, since the Monday's meeting, I've sort of gone back and tried through some of the plans and trying to get a sense of what I think the indicators are pointing towards those goals. And so I feel a little bit more comfortable with where this is going, but I think it is hard to communicate and have discussion in absence of those goals. So that's where I think what are the indicators indicating, right? So they're indicating X, but what's it in service of? And that's maybe where some of that confusion is. I'm just speaking for myself. It's where a lot of that confusion lies for me. And I know that Karen and Bill and Rob and a whole bunch of other staff, they already know what all those are because this is what they're living and breathing every day. But I don't, right?
Right. And I'm in the same boat as you. I don't. And I don't really even know the process. So I'm like, yes. So whatever I said, that you can chalk up to my ignorance of the process or whatever, that's great. Because I'm coming at it from being completely disconnected from what goes on in the background. So I appreciate Bill's and Karen's input in terms of how it works, because I don't know how it works. I'm just going on what I see in terms of documents and slides and, whatever we discuss. So, but it seems like there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing that they're each chasing each other. And so, like, how do you, like, is it scenarios first, then you can revisit? I mean, I get that I'm happy that it's iterative. And then you sort of kind of go one round and you refine and you go through and you refine. That's great. I wasn't quite clear where that happens, at what stage, and.
Would it be helpful if we gave an example, Bill, of how an indicator would be connect to a scenario?
Yeah. So let's say one of the scenarios is population density, right? So right now in our existing OCP, we have growth happening along corridors, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Try and densify there. But in order to accommodate 40,000 people, you actually can't get everybody in there. So then you have to find additional areas of of the community for that density to go that's not incorporated under our existing OCP. So they have to start looking in other areas of the city. And that's where I think you might look at, okay, well, where are we going to put these people? And let's use an example like Ocean View. You know, he'd say, well, I don't really think being out at Duke Point is the best place to put all these people because it goes against a lot of the indicators. But you can test it, right? So you can actually show to people that that's, if you were decide to put all the housing there, that fails on probably many of the indicators that we're looking at, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where you're actually able to proof things out. So within the city boundaries, because that's what we're working with, and maybe there's an opportunity to grow the city boundaries in a few places if need be. Same with employment lands, right? So that's a really important one. Well, where are people going to work? Well, we can't all. We actually do have to make things, and we have to do and make things and store things, and that's not going to happen in dense areas. So we have to find areas for industrial lands, right? So where does that happen? And then of course that has impacts, like you say, Jerome, on greenhouse gases and just for the transportation, and then the buildings and all those other things. So that's kind of the idea, is that through these various scenarios where we can kind of move the pieces of the puzzle, we can see what the implications are of those. And really, at the end of the day, council and the public are going to have, I would suggest, if you had a puzzle with 100 pieces, probably 85% of those pieces aren't moving. It's really where are we moving these other little pieces around within it that makes the most sense and has the within the donut framework has the best bang for our buck. I don't know if that helps.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, there really is a way of sort of quantifying where we can the impact of different choices and comparing the costs and the benefits and across different domains as well. As you mentioned, they tend to be interconnected. So,
Ben, you have your hand up.
Thanks. A few comments, some that I've shared at our governance and priorities committee, and then talking to some specifics. I think there's a few things going on. I mean, the development of a city donut and a model that's going to articulate sort of the vision for the community and our goals, and then have indicators put into it. It's not a process that, with our current resources, that we can crack off in 2 months and have it all ready before these scenarios get developed. From what I'm seeing, the dialogue that needs to happen, and the very tricky part of just the integrative thinking that needs to go into it, it's going to take a while. I think that what I'm feeling is that as we're going through and thinking about indicators and targets, we're really trying also at the same time. I don't think that we've come out with a strong statement of what exactly do we want our city to look like, and by what metrics or by what values are we going to measure what we want to see, and that's a tricky process. But I don't think that we've clearly identified those things yet, and so there's a lot of everyone that's been working on this project, and from what we already are working from, have sort of these goals and values in us and in the back of our minds that aren't clearly articulated yet, and it's going in, but I don't think that we've actually had that in front of us, and so what is guiding our efforts isn't totally apparent and clear to everyone, and I think that. And that work is iterative as well, but I think that we could put some more effort in what are we evaluating these scenarios by, and what are we trying to achieve. And I think that's starting to take appearance in our city donut. I think the languaging between what's an indicator and what's a goal and a target is still somewhat confused. But I think that we just need to put, as we go through this process, effort into sort of like teasing that out. And I think that part of this going forward is I think that this is an important time to identify what's missing, and maybe it's not in the right category or right put in the right goal or target language, but what things are we trying to achieve in the scenario development that we're not, that's kind of missing, and I'd be really curious to hear, and I have a few ideas on that, and then I hope in this process that we are going going to spend more time, in the next 2 months as it's coming out on sort of more clearly defining our goals. And I think when I look at the city portrait process that was developed by Amsterdam, I think we kind of glanced through that a little bit, and maybe I think I was over focused on indicators and that. But when they did the 4 quadrants, really that discussion was right around like, what are our goals as a community in local ecological, in global ecological, in local social, and we didn't quite really do that. And that process of goals was sort of done in the community engagement process around how we live, how we work. We received feedback on that, but we haven't quite come up with what is our goal and vision by what we're trying to build this official community plan from. And so, that's my reflections on that. And then, sometime in this meeting, I'd like to just put forward some indicators or goals that I think that we should be considering when we're building these scenarios. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just going to sort of express what I'm feeling here. We have limited time here, that there's, I think, discussion we want to have. I also think that staff have put a lot of time and work into this, and I'm either sensing that there's communication gaps or alignment gaps, and I think that's that's a concern, not a negative or a positive thing, just as we're trying to move through this, and fully acknowledging that we've probably, we have embarked on something ambitious, and there's different expectations and different realities that need to be dealt with and discussed. And I'm not feeling like we're leaving enough time and creating a good enough space to have the dialogue to respect all parties in that regard. So, I would sort of look to our senior staff here for some advice on how we, cognizant that we're at 6:45 here. I don't feel like, I don't think the conversation, it felt very unfinished business on Monday as well with council, and that's okay. These are just realities, but I just don't think that's respectful to everyone involved as we tackle an ambitious issue, and that we're always cramming it into 5-10 minutes, and then we carry on 2 weeks later and it's same scenario. And so to me, that, what you're creating is further and further divergence, because there's not enough room for safe and respectful dialogue to start to converge and have a better understanding. So looking to you, Bill, as the only one with your face present here, is there, how do we start? Mr. Lindsay, there you are. How do we, on the
Outside.
patio, sorry, man. How do we, create a path forward here that can start to unpack these in hopefully a little bit of a better way?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first of all, I just want to acknowledge that, we've started on this rather ambitious process of amending all of our plans at one time, which I think is just unheard of at a community level, certainly of our size. So, and trying to do public engagement throughout that process. We would always have had indicators in the process to help us, measure, and as Mr. Corson spoke to very well, at the end of the day, help us evaluate different scenarios or different options in those scenarios. Council asking us to incorporate the donut model, I think worked well with a lot of the thinking that we already had around this. But it was certainly, and it continues to be, I don't know if it's a learning exercise, but we're basically, I'm not going to lie, we're building the plane while we're flying it on incorporating this model into a process that had already started. Very good. The themes around it are absolutely consistent with everything we're trying to do. So that's not at all been a large step for staff. I think, and I do want to echo what Mr. Corson said, like, at the end of the day, the city that we have is the city we have. The infrastructure, the roads, the plan, the OCP and the 25-year plan we come up with isn't going to say, let's move downtown to Duke Point and fill in Westwood Lake. Like, it's not going to be of that kind of substantial changes. They're going to be tweaks to, as what's been described here already, as many really good successes that we're seeing right now in terms of infill and densification around all of our town centers, active transportation projects. Like I think of building on more of those, but we need some way to make decisions. And the one that Bill identified about, right now in our plan, it says let's build a major resort destination out at Duke Point that has no access and would probably cost $30 to $40 million to service. I think whether you had a donut model or not, there's any kind of measure you would use would tell you that there's implications to that decision. At the end of the day, there's a whole bunch of decisions that go, or a whole bunch of factors that go into that. Ultimately, it's a political decision. It's a council decision. Public have a voice in that, and people can weigh their opinions. And at the end of the day, a council could end up picking a decision for factors other than is it the best response under the indicator model. So I think that's important to understand that these are. It's not a computer model where you input data at the start and out spits the perfect result at the end, right? There's human reality to all of this. There's decisions that are beyond, I think, just simply indicators. I think tonight there's been some really good discussion about whether these indicators capture it. I think there's a couple options for the committee right now. If you're not comfortable with the indicators that we have right now, the committee could make a motion that that to be referred back to the committee for further discussion, and then that would go to council, and council could determine how to proceed, and then council could make two decisions: that we're carrying on and proceeding with the further, or that they would send it back to the committee, to this committee, or that broader group that we met with originally for further discussion. So I think that's probably the path before you if you want to make a motion for the council to defer it back. I'll be honest with the committee members and council members who are here. We're already on a very compressed time frame to do this work in the time we've been given to do it. So we want to do this right. Absolutely, we want to. We want to be able to, at the end of the day, stand behind the work we've done. But the reality is, and this we said, I think as we said to council on Monday night, these are preliminary indicators, and they are going to evolve. They are going to change through the process. When we get out the other end of the process, and as new data becomes available, they will absolutely change and evolve. Hopefully, I didn't confuse things more than I needed to, Mr. Chairman. But if the committee's not happy with where we are right now, I think a motion to council to refer it back to the committee or to that working group would be appropriate, and council could make a decision on that.
Mr. Lindsay, I think there is no right answer, and that probably makes it difficult. So ultimately we're at the committee's whim here. I think an easy way might simply to have the indicators come back after that session with council, the workshop with council, as there might be some further refinement there, and even just some better contextualization that might make things make a little more sense. But we have 10 minutes here, 2 reports. And I don't want the committee to feel like there's any pressure one way or the other here. So, Ben.
Thank you. To you, Dale. Just like there's 2 things for me going on. Like there's the larger model that is going to affect different areas of policy, and then there's sort of just having some indicators that we can use for our scenario evaluation of the land use planning. I think getting a donut that we're going to be happy with is going to take some time. I'm curious, just for the committee, as we're doing our land use planning, is there anything that feedback, because we need to have these scenarios done, at least in my mind, out for public engagement so they can come back from council, so that we can get this OCP ratified by the end of this council term. For me, that's sort of the ultimate timeline around the official community plan. And maybe we don't need to have it completed by this council is done, but that's just kind of the timeline that I'm working on in my head. And I think we are already really tight on that timeline. For me, indicators that I think that I would like to see some goals and evaluation around would be, for ecological, would be forest canopy, and maybe we already have enough, and also permeable surfaces, and maybe there's a reason why there aren't really good for it, but you know, after being in Vancouver and just sort of seeing the importance of forest canopy and that, those elements, you know, need to be put in place with permitting and all that, and also the permeable surfaces, that I think they are really useful, and I would love to have some discussion around that for the time. But those are the two critical ones for me. And then there's other tweaks to the donut that this is not, you know, can be done later.
Yes. So do you want a motion to have these come back here? I think that's probably the simplest, at this point, the simplest way. Or not.
Well, I mean, when you say a motion to have these come back, what are these for you? The indicators?
Well, the indicator discussion, sorry.
The indicator
discussion. Wally.
A very quick comment. I guess I hope I'm just a little confused by the discussion, because what I hear from talking to a lot of people daily around town, those you're allowed to talk to today, from close enough to talk to, there's too little attention paid to the 100,000 people that live here. And what I was hearing was two of the three scenarios deal with how do we add 40,000 people that don't live here. And I really hope, and I'm bothered by the discussion when I hear people that were born here, raised here, have been here for decades, sort of saying they pay no attention to us because we're already here and we pay the bills. And I'm not really hearing in this discussion that these indicators and criteria deal with the greater community, but there's been a lot of discussion in the last half hour, including two of the three scenarios. Well, how do we add 40,000 people? Can we please not forget the 100,000 that live here now?
Okay, so what I think I'm just going to do is park this conversation unless there's any objections. If you know, we can loop back and bring it back to the committee here when it makes sense to, because I think this is unfinished conversation, and I don't think we're in the realm now of entering into a place where we're having probably as much constructive dialogue as we need to be having on the actual matter at hand. So I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the chair here and move on and go to reports. So thank you, Karen, thank you, Bill, and Rob for the presentations, and Dale for cutting into what looks like lovely patio time. We'll move on to 7A, BC Energy Step Code Acceleration Review. These are the reports. Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, this is an information report generated as part of our work plan to do a check-in on how the city has implemented the BC Energy Step Code since the implementation strategy was originally adopted in 2018, and also to do a little bit of a look around on where other communities are on Energy Step Code implementation and what maybe some next steps that we see going down the road. And ever so briefly, we did have an education program with the development community that we did complete. We did establish a home energy assessment rebate program that is still in place right now, and we did create a density amenity bonus incentive through our zoning bylaw that gives density as an incentive for with points for developers that go to higher energy steps above the BC building code. We also have a requirement for the step code through our building bylaw, and most recently we passed a rezoning policy which is requiring accelerated energy step code steps, so higher steps, more energy efficient requirements, plus an option to look at a greenhouse gas or a zero emission option for heating and cooling the building. So if you don't feel you can meet the requirements for higher steps, there's that option as well. And I think that's part of the conclusion of this report is when looking around at other communities, I think we're in a good spot as far as how we've implemented. But one thing that's been recognized by many other experts is that one thing lacking in the Energy Step Code is the fact that it's not necessarily addressing greenhouse gas emissions reductions directly. While you can lower emissions through more energy efficient design and systems in your buildings, it doesn't directly address the issues of what the fuel choice is for the building. And I think that's one of the conclusions out of this report is that that's something we need to take more focused attention until the province changes the step code to require that perhaps in the future. And there are some things that we can be looking at on the incentive side to look at that perhaps through our Schedule D rezoning bylaw as an incentive for additional density, but also maybe on the side of looking at our building bylaw as an additional requirement in the future. The report mentions there's a lot of potential actions that a local government could do if the province allows that, and there's some advocacy going on right now on a number of different fronts, but at this time the province hasn't changed how local governments, what they can and cannot do around greenhouse gas emissions management generally in the building sector. So for now we just watch and monitor, but I know council was quite interested and quite supportive of a lot of those initiatives that are being suggested. And so this report is basically just kind of pointing at we need to kind of focus more on the greenhouse gas reduction opportunities on the incentive side, but on the regulatory side, and staff are going to be working on that going forward. And there is a note in the report about a new staff position coming up in the near future, which we will have more of that focus and expertise as part of that position. So there's opportunity through more capacity to pursue that and work more closely with the development community. That's my summation of that report.
Any questions from committee members? Okay, seeing none, just express it again, Rob. I think
I'm sorry?
Going down. I'll just express again my thoughts that I think you're going down a very creative path here. So thank you very much. I think it's a very good one, and one that actually gets to the heart of the matter much more than the step code does. So thank you.
My last report, very briefly, one earlier direction from council is to look for opportunities for external funding and to obviously still pursue our goal about looking at opportunities to lower emissions and meet our emissions reductions targets. And there is an opportunity through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, a very large opportunity to take advantage of some significant funding to do potentially some deep energy retrofit program development, looking at opportunities on a regional level, to look at how we can make the process to finance and support homeowners who want to do more significant retrofits to upgrade the efficiency of their home and to make them as zero carbon as possible, potentially. So the second information report is just simply saying that we want to pursue a feasibility study using this funding and working with the regional district to kind of look at this issue on a regional level and look at all the existing rebates provincially, but also locally, and have some good discussion with the development community, energy advisors, homeowners all around potential barriers with the system as it exists now and how we can make a more efficient, kind of easier process for homeowners perhaps that are, I don't know, with oil tanks and have concerns about the cost of even considering switching, and with the contamination concerns, all the way to looking at changing out windows, but not quite understanding perhaps the process of the forms and applications that need to be applied as they are now. So that's hopefully what we'll get out of this feasibility study and a roadmap to developing I hope, an innovative financing program that might look at some opportunities like ACE financing, for example, that the province might allow local governments to pursue in the near future. So that's my summation of that report, and happy to take any questions or listen to any feedback.
Any questions on that? And just for information, the regional district at the committee of the whole yesterday did endorse that partnership with the city of Nunavut. See no questions. So any other business? Not aware of any? See none, and we just need a motion to adjourn. Thanks, Jerome. Seconder. Thanks, Lisa. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your evening, and we'll loop back on that indicator discussion.